Hello, everyone. This is Gio, your host, and this is I'm scared. And we are getting to the craziest, I think, for me, the beginning of the craziness of what is Ed Gein, and as well as Alfred Hitchcock. Holy cow! Well, this is episode 2, Sick as Your Secrets. Before I go continuing on, if you haven't heard episode 1, hear that one. If not, I will kind of go basis off of what we left off on and continuing on to episode 2. So, without further ado, here is our lovely theme.
If you are prone to scary easily, avoiding all the scary horror movies, you'll never watch but are intrigued to. Geo and Alex watch and review, so you don't have to. So you don't have to.
Alright, so where did we leave off on episode 1? Well, in episode 1, Mother, right, we are set with now Ed is alone. Mother is dead. Brother is dead, right? There's a corpse sitting in a chair dressed up as Mother in Mother's room, right? And now he's free to do whatever the heck he wants, which is obviously being a slob because he could never be a slob. He's eating beans constantly, just, I guess, single, and finally free life, right? So we have that here. But now we get introduced to Alfred Hitchcock and how he ended up, getting into the story of Ed Gein and talking about how he could hear his mother talking to him because he had a undiagnosed schizophrenic disorder. And so we see both how Hollywood is starting to be asphyxiated with such historical beings, per se, or such historical events that were real, that were gruesome, but they said, hey, we can, make it more Hollywoody-ish, right? Or I don't know how you say Hollywoodish. And so we are getting both sides of now. Ed Gein's still, obsessed, or his fixation with the death, with corpses, hidden rituals begins to surface. All these kind of things of saying, if I was able to dig this person up, can I dig someone up? And again, reading from this other comic of how she would, she would lotion the dead bodies. Yeah, and this is true. This is true. So it's crazy. But she would lotion the dead bodies so that way they would stay nice and like elasticy. Then she would skin them, and then that's when she would, stretch or do whatever she needed to make whatever furniture she was trying to make. So he was, obsessed with that. And now he is seeing that he can do that, and at that time, nobody's going to stop him because everybody knows Ed Gein was always off. So they just knew that, he was a little weird, right? But they didn't suspect him of doing anything as evil, right? Everything starts getting darker. We start seeing the blur between what is really reality and all the horror and myths that come with him being turned off, meaning his mind or his perspective of saying, "Oh, this is wrong," gets turned off because of this his disorder. So he ends up doing all these things by his obsession, but you don't know how real it is. It's just crazy. And so now we're also seeing how Alfred Hitchcock wants to kind of portray that, right? He gets this young actor who, I guess his secret is being gay, and back then was a terrible secret or a thing that you didn't want to admit that you were. But he gets this actor who he can help portray these type of things, right? portray the craziness of thinking your mother's alive, or you know, the fact that you would cut off a lot of women's private parts and store them, and things like that. Just all the secrets that are held, that Ed held for a while. How it could, how this, you know personal life choice is gonna help him portray well, uh, this character that Alfred's trying to do, right? So we see both, perspectives of things. And this historically is honestly, like I said, this is when Ed starts grave robbing, and the creation of the grotesque trophies are well documented. So all this stuff is actually historically true. It starts coming in, and then now we get into, you know what he's doing is already opening up ideas for others to follow suit, right? The one thing that I've always been so like intrigued with, when it comes to like killings, like, so I watched Monsters Dahmer, which I will go through and discuss each episode as well as the Menendez brothers. Not only that, I've seen like, the guy from Chicago. I'm drawing a blank. John Wayne Gacy. Ted Bundy. The one thing about all these people that I've always been fascinated and wanted to see how their mentality was. Like, why did it? What led them to do such things? And were they conscious about it? Were they unconscious? And this is what we kind of get with Ed Gein, right? Was he aware that he was doing this, or did all of a sudden his mind switch and he was off? So we're gonna get through all of that, but that's the one thing that comes to my mind when I think about it. But what comes from these people, when people start learning from them, is that you get the other crazy people who then want to copy them and do almost a similar to same thing and become killers themselves. And that's what kind of, I think, Hollywood starts to push, right? We're getting these documentaries, and I think my wife asked me once, she's like, why does the US have so many documentaries of serial killers, or killers in general, or of specific crimes? And to be honest, I honestly don't know to say. I think we're just fascinated of things that could, that happen, that we don't understand why it could. Like, the person seemed normal. There could be one of our neighbors. Maybe we want to be more aware of things. But we do tend to, glorify the killers rather than, respect the victims. And I'm probably going off on all bases, like going off topic of this, but that's where we get with Ed Gein, right? He started doing this stuff not because he um grew up, say, seeing his mother do something or his father doing something, or like by influence, right? He just got fascinated by what was happening after the war. Again, fascinated by how, unfortunately, the Nazis were torturing, and all the dead corpses and stuff like that. That he ended up wanting to try to do this the same thing, and maybe that's what switched in his head when the schizophrenia kicked in. That it was like, hey, let's do this, and I'll make sure to like mask it so that way you don't feel it or feel pain about it. Maybe, I don't know. But I think that's where we end up going into seeing that how this ended up growing into writers, like I said, script readers, writers wanting to create a specific story, seeing the beginnings of Alfred Hitchcock, who was the horror king of the days, um, be, because he went against all the rules that you can think of making films. And so now you're seeing just exactly where his inspiration came from. And we're also seeing how Ed is just getting more and more into this. But at the end, and I'm gonna give you the end, right? And at the end, how he doesn't remember anything because of the same factor of what was real, what was his internal obsession, what was his external action. You know, was his obsession so grand that it would click off his head for this? But I'm going too much into this. One way or another, episode 2 made us see in reality that we can kind of lose it and not know when we've lost it, right? And maybe we're pushing too much of our limits, that's exactly what Alfred Hitchcock did. He pushed the limits to make horror become what horror is now. And so we should, I guess, be grateful for this inspiration, but I feel like it could have been avoided as well. Because a lot of things were not handled correctly. But we will continue on to episode 3 because we're not done yet. All right, these were 8 episodes of just us seeing in honesty someone who didn't have the support he needed, who didn't have the medical diagnosis or support that he needed back in those days, that ended up causing so much gruesome things. And we will get onto that in the next episode. But until then, you guys have a spooky week.
If you are prone to scare easily, avoiding all the scary horror movies, you'll never watch but are intrigued to. Geo and Alex watch and review, so you don't have to.